Welcome back to Movies TV Mad. You can follow me on Twitter at Movies TV Mad and on Instagram and on Threads at Movies TV Mad X. A very warm welcome to the Movies TV Mad Daily. Today we're going back in time and we're going to talk about the elephant in the room, Batman vs Superman, Dawn of Justice. Now it's interesting for all the haters that they refuse to admit that Batman vs Superman, Dawn of Justice is Batman's redemption story. It's an older Batman's redemption story. He's bitter about losing Robin. He's bitter. He's angry and he's taking it all out on Superman, the new kid on the block. And it ends up being a huge redemption story for Batman. Batman vs Superman, Dawn of Justice is a film that I love, but readily admit it should never have happened. It was dynamite, and it would have been dynamite to any commercial studio. But here's the interesting thing about BVS. The studio execs loved it when they first saw it, when it was first put together for them. They thought they had another Dark Knight. This is true, if you remember all the noises pre-release. It wasn't Batman vs Superman, Dawn of Justice, the film, that scared the shit out of WB. It was the divisive, divided reaction to the film. It scared the shit out of them because they put Batman and Superman together to make the money that Man of Steel didn't. And the early release was huge. It broke box office records. So that's why it ended up with 850 globally, 850 million. But of course, it should have ended up with a couple of 100 million. No, let me say that again, not a couple 100 million, but 2 billion. And it didn't, because the drop-off was also record-breaking in week 2. The movie upset a hell of a lot of people. But why were so many people upset about BVS? Let's not forget, they knew how people felt about superheroes in the comics that have never really killed, right? We can nitpick about it, having them kill. So Superman killing Zod in Man of Steel didn't go down well. So what did they do? What did Snyder do? He saw that, you know, David S. Goya's idea of Superman killing Zod didn't go down well. What did he do? Let's have Batman branding people. Let's have Batman killing people. Sometimes inadvertently, sometimes purposefully. And it obviously wasn't going to go down well. But here's the thing. Snyder was very much aware the reaction his film was going to have. And he just didn't give a shit. The studio, I think, were a lot more naive to what was going on. Although it was interesting the way they marketed the film. It was like they were scared of the actual film. And if you're scared of a film, then you have to get the director to go back and reshoot some stuff. But they didn't do that. Instead, they cut half an hour from the movie. And I don't think it was anything to do with the bits they cut out, because I think it's Snyder who went back and cut certain bits out. But they wanted a shorter length time, which also hurt the movie, because in a lot of ways, to a lot of people, BVS didn't really make sense. And that didn't help the reviews either, of course. But basically, Batman vs Superman, Dawn of Justice doubles down on everything people didn't like about Man of Steel. In an even worse way, because Superman walks around BVS like a man with a slapped ass. So he barely looks happy. He's not, you know, I think this is what Goya and Nolan absolutely got right with Man of Steel. There are moments when Clark is smiling when he's with his mother, sometimes with Lois. When he's flying for the first time, there are genuine joyful moments with Superman in Man of Steel. It is more of a somber movie, there's more realism in it and all of that, but there are, you know, typical smiley Superman bantery moments. In the end with Lois in the Daily Planet, you know, welcome to the planet. Thank you, Lois, and he smiles. And you think, wow, this is what we got to look forward to in the sequel. Oh, no, you don't, because Goya is pushed out, as we've already discussed. The big mistake that, of course, destroyed the DCEU, because Goya's and Nolan's plans were very, very good, and the DCEU, in my opinion, would have been a success if they stuck with them. Despite Man of Steel barely making 700 million, I still think they should have stuck with the plan with MOS. Goya and Nolan running the narrative, Snyder directing. That's what they should have done. Instead, they gave the keys to Zack, and to no one's surprise, apart from the studios, Zack went all Zack Snyder. He went all Snydery. What did you expect? And it's interesting if you compare it to Rian Johnson's The Last Jedi, because everyone at that studio didn't give a shit. Rian Johnson knew what he was doing. He knew he was going to piss people off, as Snyder did, but the studio were happy with that. And it's interesting with Star Wars, they haven't tried to change the direction. They keep on shaving against the grain with Star Wars, which of course is a very, very interesting situation. And this has been a situation over at Lucasfilm ever since The Last Jedi. But with Batman vs Superman, WB have genuinely tried to change the trajectory, as I said yesterday, trying to make Pepsi-Cola taste like Coca-Cola. In other words, trying to go for that MCU aesthetic, which is a big mistake with DC. You should never try and Marvelize DC. You should never try and DC Marvel. Marvel is Marvel. Marvel really is about ordinary human beings who become mutants, who get powers. It's a different thing. It's what Stan Lee always was looking to do, to go the opposite way of Superman and different characters like that. Okay, they've got 4, but basically most of Marvel's characters are ordinary human beings who have superhuman abilities, and there's a relatability about that, and that's what Lee was going for all those years ago. But you can't Marvelize DC. And I've said it before, this is why James Gunn's there, because they're still trying to Marvelize DC. No lessons have been learned from the mistake of booting out David Goya and Christopher Nolan from Man of Steel. So basically, you've got a film in BVS that I think is a very well-made film. I think is a very well-written film, the extended edition. I enjoy it. I understand it's a Batman redemption story. Snyder isn't trying to say that Bruce Wayne and Batman is doing the right thing. That's the point. That's the point. Snyder doesn't agree with Batman's actions. That's the point. It's a redemption story. He gets inspired by Superman's pure-heartedness, and he goes back to being the Batman and Bruce Wayne we all know and love. That's the fucking point of the movie. And everybody who hated it didn't get that. And if only people understood that, it would have been okay. But it was this zero tolerance on Batman killing. People didn't like that. People didn't want to see that. And it became utterly poisonous and divisive, and they just didn't give the film a chance. Again, I think it's an excellent movie. I watch it all the time. And it's a shame. But I still believe that Batman vs Superman is a movie that shouldn't exist. Of course, I'm glad it exists for myself, for my own enjoyment. It's a great DC movie, as is Man of Steel, as is the Snyder Cut, as is Aquaman. You know, I like those movies. And, you know, warts and all, I like Black Adam. But the problem is, you made a film that half the audience didn't want and didn't like. But let's go back to the marketing, because it's clear that WB were slightly afraid of this film because the way it was marketed was like a WWF brawl against Batman and Superman. It's clear that's what they wanted the public to think it was. And this was part of Batman vs Superman's big problem, because they saw a movie marketed, but the movie marketed wasn't the film we saw. Batman and Superman fight for around 9 minutes for the entire movie. So people are thinking, quite rightly, the fight isn't the thing. So I think if you market it in the right way, maybe you don't get as much hate for it. But people are still going to be annoyed that Batman is killing, because hardcore Batman fans don't want to see Batman killing. But ultimately, Affleck's Batman is a very, very, very good Batman. He's a hardcore Batman. His costume, Michael Wilkinson outdid himself with that costume. It is so good. Forget the other costumes they used, like in the Snyder Cut and Justice League. The best version of the costume is in BVS. So BVS isn't for everyone. But ultimately, the film is saying that Batman is wrong for what he's doing. Do you get it? Because it's a redemption story. That's the idea. Of course, everyone went for the whole, the mothers having the same name thing. Even though the mothers having the same name thing has been a thing in DC comic books for years. It was common fucking knowledge. Again, like Man of Steel, Marvel fans and haters and Snyder haters decided to use the Marvel thing against the film. It was like the too much destruction vibe for Man of Steel. People who hate something, who want to make it look bad, will say anything. And this is what happened with the Martha thing. Anyone with any kind of intelligence knows they don't stop fighting because the mothers simply have the same name. Once once Bruce realizes that his, Superman's mother, Clark's mother, is being held hostage, that's why the fight stops. Yes, when he hears the name Martha, he don't know what's going on. Save Martha. Didn't my mum die that night? Maybe. What's going on? Do you know what I mean? Is my mum alive? He's getting confused. So the whole thing is that people took that moment and weaponized it. And there is nothing wrong with the Martha moment. Let me be clear about this, as far as I'm concerned. And any maniac who thinks it's a bad thing, there was nothing wrong with the Martha moment. It made perfect sense. You don't have to be clever. You don't have to be fucking Einstein or anyone else to work it out. It's obvious what Snyder and Terrio were doing here. But you see, Batman versus Superman and the divisive element of it is a sheer consequence of Goya being booted out after Man of Steel. It's a theme I've been talking about this is the third video, because I think it's important to understand that Goya and Nolan, it was their vision for Man of Steel, not Snyder. Because, as I said yesterday and the day before, there's this thing that Man of Steel is part of the Snyderverse. Yes, it is now, because Snyder grabs Man of Steel, he continues BVS straight from Man of Steel, but that wasn't the original plan from Goya and Nolan. Goya and Nolan didn't want Batman and Superman in the same film, in the sequel to Man of Steel. I think this was the deal breaker, and I think this is why Nolan and Goya walked away. Nolan being an executive producer on BVS means nothing. It's just a credit because he was involved with Man of Steel. Goya's writing credit in BVS is absolute bullshit. I think he wrote one kind of draft of a Man of Steel sequel, and this is why he's credited for BVS. I think even Terrio criticised Goya's script, which is interesting. I didn't like that. I think Terrio is a very good writer. His script for BVS is very, very good. I don't think it was very classy going after Goya. But anyway, Goya is a very good writer, and Man of Steel is a really, really good film. And that is what I love about Man of Steel is like what I said earlier. Yes, it can be serious. Yes, it can be grounded, but it doesn't forget it's a Superman movie. And there are moments, light-hearted moments, in Man of Steel. And Superman always feels this pure-hearted Superman in Man of Steel. It's Superman Begins, it's Superman he's never been Superman before, he's never done this before, and all of a sudden he has to go up against the Kryptonians, Zod, and his army. And the other day I was watching someone's reaction on YouTube and they're saying, oh my God, why is that woman in AKA, what's her name, Feora, you know, stronger than Superman? And this person watching it didn't really get it. Well, Feora is a trained fucking soldier. Clark Kent isn't a trained soldier. Yes, Clark is well built. He's got superpowers, but he's not trained. So it makes sense that Feora, when she's pushing him on the safe and all that, is beating the living shit out of him because he's not got the training. That's why the Kryptonians can beat him. Even in his final fight with Zod, Zod is getting a lot of beats in there because Superman has had no training. But by that moment, Superman's a bit more competitive because he's had the whole film to get up to Zod's level, but he's still not on Zod's level. But in the end of the film, he's got him in this arm lock, hasn't he? But at the end of the day, Zod's in that arm lock because he wants to be in that arm lock. Zod wants to die. That's to me the underlining thing in Man of Steel. When he's about to heat vision that family, he's daring Superman to kill him. He's lost everything. He's lost everything. His people, his plan, his mission. He's literally got nothing to live for anymore. So I think this was a way of him getting Superman to kill him. He put Superman in a no-win scenario. And it's very clever by Goya. I never minded Superman killing Zod. By the way, I'm not that precious on the no-kill policy. I think as long as Superman doesn't kill innocent people or, you know, villains who are not a threat, that's one thing, you know. But I think in terms of Zod, he had no choice, and it's a compelling moment. And personally, I didn't mind it. I still don't think it should have been done because it damaged the profitability of Man of Steel. And we would have stuck with Goya and Nolan, and by now we would have been in a better place rather than constantly chasing after the MCU model. WB wanting Pepsi to taste like Coca-Cola. So the film, like in terms of BVS, as much as I love it, it should never have been. That situation should never have been. Snyder shouldn't have been in charge of the franchise. Goya and Nolan should have remained in charge, and Zack should have been their director. We are continuing the conversation from yesterday because Man of Steel and BVS are kind of, if you put those films together, actually they're quite interesting. I'd like to see the two movies back to back without any end credits for Man of Steel. But Batman vs Superman does exist. It nearly made 900 million. I think it's an outstanding film, but commercially, it's suicide for a studio. And they could have stopped this at any time. They could have gone to Snyder and said, mate, what are you doing? But of course it was too late. They gave Snyder the keys to the kingdom. There was nothing that could be done about that. Once, you know, look, if you want a commercial Batman and Superman movie, the last person you give it to is Zack Snyder. They wanted Tim Burton to make a sequel to Batman. He made Batman Returns. It was always going to be that because it's Tim Burton. If you don't want that, why did you give the keys to Tim Burton? It makes no sense. So WB have got a habit of this. And we went from Batman Returns to Batman Forever. In other words, we went from, you know, BVS and Suicide Squad to Justice League. You can't do that. And now what they're doing with DC Universe is saying, well, this is a new universe. Well, it kind of isn't. But they're still chasing that brighter, more inspirational, uplifting tone. And this is why they've gone with Gunn. Gunn claims that his DC Universe is nothing like the MCU. He reckons it's more like Lord of the Rings and Star Wars. Well, let's hope it's George Lucas and Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings and Star Wars and not Disney's Star Wars, right, James? But I'm sure James doesn't like Disney any more than any of us do. After all, they did fire him when they shouldn't have done. And I don't approve of James's comments, his jokes about kids, but he shouldn't have been fired for that. I would have suspended him. I would have got him to work with children as a kind of punishment and give back to children. That's what I would have done. But firing him, you know, the punishment didn't fit the crime. And it was a very old crime, by the way. And he didn't even commit a crime. The jokes were bad. And, you know, he was working for Disney, a family studio. A studio that makes content, movies, for families. So Disney were in an awkward place. But it'll be interesting what Gunn does. Superman's going to be a very interesting situation. Because some big claims have been made by Zaslav, by Gunn. So we'll see next July. I'm going to be one of the first people to go and see that film. Very excited to give you my thoughts and feelings about that film. This is Superman, my favourite character. So I will be there. I know sometimes I've said, oh, I'm going to watch a movie and react to it, and I haven't, and I apologise for that. Maybe in the end because I thought, fuck this shit, I can't be bothered. And that's the beauty of having a channel that's not successful, that I'm not desperate to make successful. I can do what I fucking want. But obviously with Superman, I'm going to try and get an early screening. And of course, before that, Joker Folie à Deux. I'm going to react to that movie, no question about that. Very, very excited for that movie. That's the first DC movie, Creature Commandos. If I get access to it early, we will, of course, talk about Creature Commandos. The trailer has put me off. I was a little bit more excited than I am now before I saw the trailer for Creature Commandos. But going back to BVS, BVS is a very interesting situation because you go away from Goya's and Nolan's plan and you create BVS to try and set up the Justice League. I'm not sure if Goya and Nolan's original plan was to set up the Justice League. I'm not sure. They definitely wanted to jump from Man of Steel to Man of Steel 2 straight away. It wouldn't even surprise me if their first idea, Goya and Nolan's, was to do a Superman trilogy before they even went to Batman. I think their idea was, look, we've just done Batman. Let's keep away from Batman because, of course, the studio want this new franchise, the dceu, to deal with Batman straight away. I think probably it was too soon to reintroduce Batman. But if Snyder did one thing right, he gave us a very good Batman in Ben Affleck. Not everybody's cup of tea. And I mean, then you go to Eisenberg's Lex Luthor, not everybody's cup of tea. And the problem with the DCEU is there's too many things that weren't everybody's cup of tea. But if I go back to Man of Steel, there's a lot of people who don't like BVS who like Man of Steel. I think people were quite supportive of all the casting in Man of Steel. I think there's certain incidents people weren't happy with, but that was on Goya, not on Snyder. When you go down these directions, whether it's Goya, whether it's Snyder, and you shave against the grain, the hardcore fans are going to come at you and you've got a bit of a problem. So Man of Steel, as great as it is, and I do believe Goya's and Nolan's vision would have been interesting and they should have stuck with it. But I think once you start shaving against the grain, you've got a big problem. Once the critics come in, once the YouTube critics come in, when the fans turn on you, it's very difficult. And Man of Steel was in that situation already. But they could have saved the situation. But instead, they decided to shave against the grain even more with BVS. And this is where it all went wrong. You've got to toe the line. You've got to understand what the audience are telling you. Right, you should be able to make your movie, but you've also got to listen to your customer, to your audiences. And BVS basically doubles down on all the problems that were created in Man of Steel instead of saying, all right, this is not what people want generally. This is not what they want. But of course, you've put Snyder in position. So once you put Snyder in position, you're not going to get the inspirational, uplifting Batman versus Superman movie that you want. I believe Gunn will make Batman and Superman friends instantaneously because it's something that Gunn likes as a comic book fan and it's something he knows the audience likes as well. So he's not going to shave against the grain. This is a franchise that has to make money, but of course Gunn has his own ideas and it will be interesting how he executes Superman and Batman. For example, we've already seen a Clark Kent disguise. Now, I wouldn't mistake him for Superman. I don't know about you. So that's interesting already. Taking a kind of literal disguise and saying, well, try recognising Superman and Clark Kent. Now, you can't. If you've seen the pictures, you'll know what I'm talking about. But there is a kind of difference between saying BVS is a bad film and saying, you know, it's problematic. But I don't think BVS is a bad film. As I said earlier, I think BVS is a very, very good film. On its own, it's a great movie. Probably BVS should have been a film standing on its own right. That would have been perfect for an Elseworld movie. But once you start connecting a film like that to a franchise, you've got an even bigger problem. Because if BVS is a film on its own, and it's a standalone, it's a one-off, it doesn't matter. But once it's connected to the DC Extended Universe, it breaks everything. And it's only the second movie. So already you've got a situation where some people weren't happy with MOS, and now people ain't happy with BVS. And then you're going straight into the Suicide Squad, which was apparently supposed to be directed and written by David Ayer, but of course they interfered with that movie as well. So you've got Suicide Squad that the critics and some fans don't like either. This is a third movie. Then you're going into Wonder Woman, which people liked. So you've got a little bit of time on your hands. So you think Justice League's going to be good, right? Well, they redo Snyder's Justice League. People hate it. It's a fucking flop. This is the fourth movie that people have got problems with. Do you get me? Then you get Aquaman that makes $1 billion. Not everybody's cup of tea, but I think mostly people enjoyed watching it in the cinema. Then you get Shazam, which most people were happy with. Didn't make a lot of money, but it didn't cost much to make, so they made a substantial little profit. So there wasn't much noise over Shazam. After Shazam, not one movie, if I remember rightly, made any fucking money. Interesting. Some of them were well reviewed. But that's just part of the corruption of the review system these days. So you can't trust that. But after Shazam, it was boom. Nobody was talking about it anymore. People were bored. So when they bring in James Gunn to do the Suicide Squad, by that moment you've got COVID, it doesn't make any money, but it is a good film. It's better than Birds of Prey and the other shit they put out since Shazam. There's no question about that, whether you hate Gunn or not. The Suicide Squad is a solid, good movie with some interesting themes at the very least. But by then, it was over. By then, the die was cast. Some people believe that Batman vs Superman is the movie that broke the DCEU. But the truth of the matter is, this franchise was broken from the release of Man of Steel. As much as I love Man of Steel and BVS and the Snyder Cut and some other films within the franchise, the truth is, as I said earlier, once you shave against the grain, and we're talking about a commercial studio who owns these IPs to make money commercially. They're not here just to make Superman and Batman films because they happen to like Superman and Batman or because they happen to be DC fans. It's about money. A commercial studio cannot be financing Zack Snyder's personal artwork. And that's the truth. And as much as I love his films and I love his personal artwork, at the end of the day, you're there to make a commercial movie. That's what Batman and Superman are. The commercial characters. That's what DC Comics and his other characters are. It's a commercial property to make money. And unfortunately, you can't convince Snyder of that. I'm going to do what I want to do. So then you say, well, it was a mistake to bring Zack Snyder in. Despite how great his movies look, and what a great director visually I believe he is. I don't think there's anyone better to direct a comic book movie, a fantasy movie, than Zack Snyder. He uses, computer-generated images like a paintbrush. He is an artist when it comes to CGI. So if he does as he's told and makes the movie he's told to make, by Goyer and Nolan, like he did in Man of Steel, for me, it ends up quite well. But I think the DCEU cannot blame Batman vs Superman. Batman vs Superman created a very controversial situation. It divided audiences, but the complaints were already there with Man of Steel. Now, after Man of Steel, they could have tried to calm it down a bit, But Goya and Nolan were gone. I'm sure Nolan was intelligent enough to understand, to attempt to calm down some of the situations that people didn't like about Man of Steel. But the only adult in the room was gone. And Snyder isn't an adult in the room. He's just going to do whatever the fuck he wants.